Three, two, one, action. Welcome back to episode 65 of As Seen on Screen. I'm Nicole, and we're your source for entertainment news, reviews, conversations, and more. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts on Spotify and YouTube. Well, welcome back. I'm so glad you're all here today. I'm excited to get back into some review content. We've been so lucky over the past month or so to have so many great conversations and interviews to share with you all, and we can't wait to keep sharing more of those. But I'm excited today to get back sharing some movie reviews with you all because we haven't in about a month. So today I decided to do a bit of a recap. I've compiled 5 movies that I've watched over the past month, share my thoughts and feelings. So let's jump right in today. I wanted to start off with my favorite watch, which was Black Phone 2, which is the direct sequel to Black Phone from 2022. It is a horror thriller starring Ethan Hawke, Mason Thames, Madeline McGraw, and the director Scott Derrickson is back for this sequel as well. Now, if you haven't heard what this film is all about, here's the synopsis on Letterboxd. It says, "Dead is just a word." 4 years after escaping the grabber, Finney Blake, played by Mason Thames, is struggling with his life after captivity. When his sister Gwen, Madeline McGraw, begins receiving calls in her dreams from the Black Phone and seeing disturbing visions of 3 boys being stalked at a winter camp, the siblings become determined to solve the mystery and confront a killer who has grown more powerful in death and more significant to them than either could imagine. Now, if you haven't seen the first film, I am going to talk a bit about spoilers from the first film, so if you don't want to hear those, just skip ahead to our next part. But let's jump right in, because if you've been listening to this podcast for a bit, you know how I feel about sequels. I'm very iffy on them. I'm very skeptical on them. And I'm gonna be honest, when I first heard they were making a sequel to Black Phone, I was even more skeptical because when you've watched the first one, you know that Finney kills the grabber. So, oftentimes in horror movies, especially longer franchises, we see them bring back the killer in some obscene way. It doesn't make any sense. It's not super logical, but you just go along with it for the sake of the film. So, it was very dependent for me on how they were going to bring the grabber back and kind of justify what happened here. I think they did such a great job. I really love this. So much so that, and I say this with caution because it's just so rare, I feel like, for me to say this, but I think I enjoyed this one better than the original, which is so pleasantly rare, honestly. I'm so excited that I loved this so much. I came out of the theater very pleased that this was as good as I was hoping it would be, based on some of the reactions. I saw this a few weeks after it came out, so people had already been reacting to it, and I got a bit more excited, a little less skeptical, and they were very much right. I agree with all of the very positive reviews on this film. Let's jump into the filmmaking aspect of it because I loved how they filmed the nightmare sequences that Gwen has throughout this movie. They're super grainy, they're super eerie. It really makes your skin crawl when you're watching them. And so I was reading some articles and watching some Q&As with the filmmakers, and they used Super 8 to film those nightmare sequences. And so I think it's really cool that the filmmakers were so adamant on not using computer generation to make these scenes look how they are. And it's really just all from the filmmaking. And I think the differences, the distinct differences that you see between those nightmare sequences and reality are so strong, and they really help you fall into that atmosphere and put yourself in those shoes of what Gwen would be feeling and that terror and that mystery of what on earth is happening. How do you differentiate between dream versus reality? And so that really helped guide, I think, in that perspective. But I also think it very much added to that additional atmosphere of just creepiness, pure creepiness. One of the standouts for me from this whole movie is Madeline McGraw. She is, of course, in the first movie as Gwen still, Finney's younger sister, but she's much more of a dominant character in this film, and Madeline truly captivated me as I was watching this film. I really admire how Gwen is so headstrong, she's determined, she's very adamant on figuring out what on earth is happening in their lives with the grabber and really defeat him. She is set on taking him down, and I admire that about her. She is a kick-ass, strong female character, so I think Madeline did a great job of portraying her. I loved seeing her more on the screen in this movie. I think it was very smart to shift the weight of the story between Finney and Gwen instead of relying on just Finney or just Gwen. I think they did a great job of sharing that story because they're siblings. So it makes sense that if they're going through this together, this story is so strongly related. And of course, that ties into a lot of the grabber's motives for this. But let's talk about Finney. Mason Thames portrays, of course, Finney in both films. And with this 3 year gap we see between the first and second movie, you see the characters grow up so much. And I think Mason Thames really grew with that character. It's so evident if you watch the first one and then directly watch the second one, how much he's grown up even in just those 3 years. But even just emotionally, his character, Finney, has really grown up. And he's also changed because of the trauma that he's gone through with the grabber in the first film. And we see how that's continuing to impact his life in the second film. You know, Finney and Gwen, even their father, they've gone through so much. They have lost their mother. Finney kidnapped, survived, escaped a serial killer. I mean, that's not an easy path to tread through. And so, of course, Finney is going to have all this trauma built up with him. And I think Mason does a great job of portraying what that trauma would look like on this individual and showing how it impacts his day-to-day life and his relationships and how he is acting and appearing himself to be. And it's just a very well done, and it's very believable in that aspect of the character, which I think is very important as well. It doesn't feel insincere to who Finney would probably be or how he would be impacted had he gone through this trauma in a real life setting. So I really enjoyed both Madeline and Mason's performances in this film. Now, of course, we have to talk about Ethan Hawke's character as well. He portrays the grabber, of course. And I mean, there's so many Ethan Hawke roles that throughout his career I love, on variations of genres, everything like that. Truly, the grabber is one of my favorites because it is so haunting and gripping. His character hides behind this mask, or at least half of it for all of the movie, and he is just so almost mysterious and haunting and creepy, and the voice that Ethan does for this character. The voice, I think, is honestly the most haunting part of it because he's hiding and because you don't know as an audience member that much about him. As soon as he either comes on screen or his presence there, he speaks. Within that moment, the hair on my skin is just standing up and crawling. He's just so creepy and just all the unknowingness about him, the mystery, the intrigue. And Ethan just does such a great job of portraying all of that and bringing that to life. One change that I think they made that was very effective in this film was the change of setting. In the first film, of course, they're confined more to their neighborhood or the basement or the house. And in this film, we start off in the neighborhood without giving away spoilers, but it changes to this kids' camp, this kids' religion camp on Alpine Lake. And historically, when you think about horror movies, camps are a great setting for a scary movie. Most famously, I'd say Friday the 13th. Recently, you could think of Hell of a Summer, that has more of a lighthearted slasher tone to it, but still nonetheless a horror slasher. And there's many in between there as well. And I think what adds to that unsettling nature is that it's a place where people should feel safe. It's a place where parents are sending their kids for safety, and it shouldn't be a place where you feel scared to be. But when done right, it's so unsettling. And I think the added layer of the weather in this film, if you look on the poster or the trailer, you see that there's a snowstorm. The weather is not in their favor. And I think all of these layers are just adding to how they feel kind of trapped and isolated. And even as an audience member, you feel isolated because it's this new unknown location. As an audience member, having watched the first one, you don't know this one as well. You kind of are familiar with the neighborhood and what's going on there, but this new camp, you have no idea where they are and what's going to be happening to them there, and you're figuring it out with the characters. And so all of that just is such a new layer of confined, of being stuck, of being unsettled of what's happening next. I also wanted to talk about the storyline itself because something that's so important with sequels, I think, in any genre, is that when you add to this story and you evolve these characters and you evolve their story, it has to make sense. Sometimes you watch a sequel and I feel like what they added to the storyline in the sequel is unnecessary or it doesn't necessarily mesh well with the first film. And it almost feels like they added it just because they had to add extra storyline or they had to add growth. And it doesn't necessarily feel like it has a point. This film, they did it very effectively, where what they added on to the story, what they added to these characters' lives and their stories, and intertwining the first and second film makes sense and it doesn't feel forced. It feels very natural to the film, to their stories, to these characters and the relationships. And what I like, what it did about it too, specifically, without again giving away any spoilers, is it helps guide us as audience members to understand the grabber's fixation. Of course, obviously, the grabber, I'm sure, feels like he has unfinished business with Finney, and which could be a very understandable reason for him coming back and trying to still take out revenge on him for the events of the first film. But it goes an extra mile, and of course, I'm not going to tell you what that is, but I think they just did it so well. It didn't feel forced. The story feels like it's very natural and very cohesive almost. It just feels like almost one long cohesive story instead of two separate movies. And I think that's very important for sequels, and probably a reason why I feel so strongly that this one very much matches the vibes and the energy and the feelings of the first movie, because it just makes so much sense. Overall, I really enjoyed watching Black Phone 2. I think this is a great horror sequel. I think this is a great example of how to do a horror sequel right. I gave it a 4 to 5 on Letterboxd. It's still in theaters, so you can catch it now, and it is also available now to buy or rent on all digital platforms. So you have a variety of ways you can watch it. That being said, we also have a contest going on our page right now where some of our followers can win a digital copy of the film. So head over to our Instagram or TikTok. The contest closes on Sunday, November 16th at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. All of the entry rules are in the captions on the post, so you can head over there now. Okay, next up on my watch was Springsteen Deliver Me From Nowhere, the new music drama biopic about Bruce Springsteen. Jeremy Allen White portrays Bruce. Jeremy Strong is John Lando, who was Bruce Springsteen's manager. He still is Bruce Springsteen's manager. Odessa Young playing Faye Romano, the love interest to Bruce Springsteen, and Stephen Graham, Douglas Springsteen, who is Bruce's father. Steven's actually having a big year. I wanted to point this out because he did portray Eddie Miller, the father in the limited series. And fun fact I found out while doing some research is he also played Dick James in Rocket Man, which of course a few years ago was the Elton John musical biopic. So I thought that was kind of funny that he's stepping back into this biopic role. And of course, the director is Scott Cooper. Now, if you aren't familiar with what exactly this music biopic focuses on in Bruce's life, this is the synopsis on Letterboxd. Everyone knows his music, but no one knows the moment everything changed. Bruce Springsteen, a young musician on the cusp of global superstardom, struggles to reconcile the pressures of success with the ghosts of his past. So, specifically, this music biopic focuses on the making of Bruce's 1982 album Nebraska, what his mental health state was at this point in his career and his life, the influence that his emotions and his mental health were having on his relationships in his life and his work. And we also learn how his childhood continued to impact his mental health into adulthood and into this moment in his life. I will mention that this movie, or this musical biopic, is based on the book of the same name by Warren Zanes. And now I was thinking about musical biopics that we've seen over the past few years, because there have been so many. Recently, we've seen Back to Black, Amy Winehouse. We've seen the Bob Marley biopic, Bob Dylan last year with Timothy Chalamet. We've seen Elvis Presley, Elton John, I mentioned. Even looking ahead, we have a Michael Jackson musical biopic coming out in April of next year. And looking super ahead, we have the Beatles biopics coming up as well. I always find it interesting with these movies to see what the filmmakers or the story writers, the artists themselves choose to explore in these movies. Last year with A Complete Unknown, the Bob Dylan musical biopic, we saw a very specific moment in his life. Same with this movie, it's no different. This is very confined to a very certain period in Bruce Springsteen's life, like I mentioned, the making of his album Nebraska, and very much just what was going on in his life from point A to point B. But not only that, I appreciate that it also gave us a peek into his childhood in a dramatic biopic way, but gave us that insight into what he went through as a child and how did those moments that we see in the film impact the present moment that we see that carried with him into adulthood. And I think that was very important. I don't think a music biopic has to focus on an artist's entire life from birth until wherever they are at now in present day. But I think they did a great job of pinpointing a moment in his life that helps even just either fans or people that don't necessarily know a lot about Bruce Springsteen's life understand his musicianship and what is important to him as an artist and with his lyrics as he's writing music, what's important to him as he's thinking about going on tour and building relationships in his life, what is he putting into all aspects of his life. And so I think they did a great job of taking one small moment and really expanding on anyone's knowledge of Bruce Springsteen. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Jeremy Allen White portrays Bruce, and I was very impressed with his musical capabilities on a variety of levels in this film. I specifically really noticed how he matched Bruce's mannerisms, his facial expressions, his stage presence. I actually watched a few either like music videos or concert clips of Bruce after watching this film, and I really noticed how Jeremy did a fantastic job of matching little movements that Bruce has about himself when he's on stage or just even speaking in interviews. So, a big round of applause to him for that because that was very well done. Another thing I was talking about with my mom after, because we went and saw it together, when she was talking about how Jeremy looked so much like a young Bruce Springsteen, which was great and important. The one thing I noticed was the brown eye contacts he was wearing, and that drastically changes it because I feel like sometimes for me personally, when I'm watching biopics, when an actor's portraying another real person, sometimes it's hard in the moment when you're just watching them to differentiate them between the actor you know when you're watching versus the person they're supposed to be, who is another real person that you might know and be familiar with. And those brown contacts really made all the difference in taking those like sharp blue eyes that Jeremy has, changing them, and it's just made it a lot easier to be like, okay, this is not Jeremy, this is Bruce. So I just thought that was a really good costuming point to point out. And speaking of his musician abilities here, I was watching another interview that his co-star on The Bear, Io Beery, did, and I believe the interviewer asked them something about, asked Io about whether she knew Jeremy could sing or not, and she was like, no, not at all. But I was very impressed. I was very impressed with Jeremy's musical abilities, his voice, how his voice sounded so similar to Bruce as well. He really captured him in all of those musical essences. Just the performance in itself, too, outside of the musical abilities. Like I mentioned, we're really seeing a pivotal point in his mental health state in Bruce's life in this movie. And you get the feeling that he's felt very empty and alone, and he was managing a lot of emotions at this point in his life. And I think Jeremy very strongly portrayed all of that. Now, let's move on to talk about some of the supporting characters and actors in this role. Jeremy Strong and Stephen Graham were phenomenal in their roles. Last year, I talked a lot about Jeremy Strong on the podcast when he was in The Apprentice and how much I really enjoyed his performance there. And this was no different, obviously, a very different role. But I think Jeremy Strong is just such an emotionally intelligent actor. And same goes for Stephen Graham. I think both of them, with these roles specifically, though they're two very different individuals that they were portraying, two very different people in Bruce's life that they were portraying, they had such emotional depth into their characters. And you really felt what they were feeling through the screen, which of course is so important for any role that you're taking on. But so much power behind those emotions that they showed. And so I really hope either one of them, ideally both of them, but either one of them I think are so deserving of supporting actor nominations once award season starts rolling in here. I'd love to see their names on there because they both really blew me away. Odessa Young, I also wanted to mention because her portrayal of Faye was also fantastic. And I think something she did so well was she ensured that her storyline remained near the forefront. I felt like she was at the forefront of my mind throughout when I was watching this because even when she wasn't on screen, I was waiting for her to come back and thinking about her character and thinking about the impacts that Faye was having on Bruce's life and that Bruce was having on Faye's life. And without mentioning spoilers, it's hard, but Bruce's mental health had a huge impact on the romantic relationship that Faye and Bruce had in this film. And I think that Odessa did a fantastic job of portraying this woman who, she knew the risks of getting into a relationship with Bruce. She knew what dating him meant with his fame, with his career. And there was a part of her, I believe, that, wanted change and wanted differences that, you see a lot in relationships and films and in real life, honestly, too. And she didn't let herself get dragged down either. She stood very strong. She put her foot down on things that she believed in, and I think she was another example of a very strong female character, which I enjoyed watching in this film. One thing I did want to mention is that at times I kind of felt the story came to a crawl almost, like there wasn't much progression happening at some points. And I think some of that's hard when you're talking about a film that's based on real life, that's based on from, it's based on a book as well, and it's based on these real trail of events in Bruce Springsteen's life. But it just got to a point in some parts of the film that I felt like it was just not moving enough. There needed to be more movement. And because it focuses on such a short span of Bruce Springsteen's life and such a specific moment in his life, I just think there needed to be some sort of movement differently because I just kind of felt that come to a crawl at some points. So that was just the one thing I noticed. I gave this a 3.5 out of 5 on Letterboxd. I still really enjoy it. I honestly feel like I've become a big fan of musical biopics because it's so interesting to learn about these musicians that I don't necessarily know a lot about in their personal lives. I love Bruce Springsteen's music, but I didn't know a ton about him personally, so I loved learning about him in this light. I felt the same watching like A Complete Unknown last year and the Elvis movie a few years ago, so I really do appreciate that there's more of these coming because they're a lot of fun when they're done well, like these ones have been. Okay, next up is Regretting You, the romantic drama, of course, based on Colleen Hoover's novel of the same name. I do want to preface before going into this, I have not read the book. I'm sorry, I know book fans, I have not read it. I apologize. So anything I'm saying in this review, I can't base it off of the book. I can't base it off of whether it's similar or not, whether they didn't add enough or added too much or changed things. I don't know because I don't know the book, so I apologize. So this review is just strictly based on the movie itself, not the book. So this movie stars McKenna Grace as Clara Grant, Allison Williams as Morgan Grant, Dave Franco as Jonah Sullivan, Mason Thames as Miller Adams, Willa Fitzgerald as Jenny Davidson, and Scott Eastwood as Chris Grant. So this was really a great ensemble cast. I think the casting of this movie, I felt personally, was very well done because I enjoyed watching these characters interact with one another. Director was Josh Boone, who, fun fact, also directed The Fault in Our Stars, which was like the first YA movie I ever watched. I believe I was around 11 years old, and that movie broke me. I cried for days. I cried for days. So Josh, your work is very emotional, I will say at that. If you are like me and aren't familiar with the book or just haven't heard about this movie, this is the synopsis on Letterboxd. Risk everything, regret nothing. Morgan Grant and her daughter Clara explore what's left behind after a devastating accident reveals a shocking betrayal and forces them to confront family secrets, redefine love, and rediscover each other. Now, I feel like with this film, I've seen a lot of different reviews, whether it be on social media, on Letterboxd, different forums, but something that stays consistent is that people feel the chemistry between McKenna Grace and Mason Thames is excellent, and I am very much in agreement with that. I feel like I've watched them grow up on screen with them, especially McKenna Grace. She's been acting since she was so young, and we're not super far apart in age. So I feel like I've watched her grow up on screen as I've grown up, and watching both her and Mason step into this more mature role for themselves was not only a first in their careers, but very well done. And I think they did a justice to these characters in that sense. And so definitely giving them flowers on that. I also want to take that a step further, and enjoyed the casting of Jonah and Morgan. I think Allison and Dave did those characters justice as well. Now, one thing I will say about this film, and something I've noticed in a lot of different like young adult YA teen films or television shows over the past few years, is they're really trying to direct the dialogue to be geared toward younger audiences. So the point where it feels a bit cringy and it feels a little bit forced. Whether they're trying to put social media slang in there or just like I don't know if it's how they imagine that younger audiences actually talk or they're just doing it more for the unserious aspect of some of these scenes, but it just feels a little cringy sometimes, and the dialogue just does not feel sincere to how these teenagers would truly be speaking to one another in real life. I have a sister who's 17, and when I think about how these characters are speaking on screen, then I think about how she speaks or how I see her speak to her friends, not the same at all. So sometimes watching films like these young adult films, the dialogue does not work for me, and I think I felt that in this film as well. Something else I feel that has really become normalized too in lots of films and television, especially this year, is romanticizing or at least accepting the act of emotional cheating. And I'm not sure why that is, because personally, while it's not the same as physical cheating, I feel like the effects can just be as detrimental when you emotionally cheat on someone as when you're physically cheating on someone. And I find it harder to root for these characters when someone is cheating in this way on their partner. I don't love it and it feels icky and I just ugh, I don't like it. I think about The Summer I Turned Pretty, and I'm going to talk about season three. So if you haven't watched season three, skip ahead a bit if you don't want spoilers. But, of course, there was debate whether Jeremiah really cheated on Bally. Were they broken up? And that's one thing. But then you also had Taylor and Steven, who were cheating on both of their partners too. And I just feel like so many of these young adult shows are normalizing and at least exploring the act of cheating on your partners, but then they don't correct it. They don't really correct it and they just kind of either skip over it or just allow it to happen or make it seem like it's this okay thing to do. And I don't necessarily think that's the best message to be spreading to younger, impressionable audiences who are interacting with this type of media. But I digress. That's just my feelings on that. Um, but I mean, speaking of the positive things, there was on top of the chemistry that I felt were between the actors, I actually thought the little details in this movie were cute. Now, again, I didn't read the book, so I know these are probably in the book, but this is just stuff I picked up on in the movie that I enjoyed as well. Miller and his lollipops. I saw a lot of people on social media being like, why does he always have a lollipop? And I kind of thought that was just a cute little detail. This guy just likes his little lollipops all the time. I think that's kind of cute. And they also had the whole thing about watermelon Jolly Ranchers in this film and how Morgan really liked those. And Jonah picked up on that through the time they knew each other as teenagers all the way into adulthood. I thought those were kind of just cute little things they added into this film. Again, probably from the book, but I just think it was cute that they kept it in, either if it was in the book. And I think that was a nice little detail that they had because I think it was just sweet and it added to this innocent essence that this younger couple has in the movie. As a movie lover myself, I also really enjoyed how Clara and Miller bonded over movies. Um, it's both of their passions, something they want to pursue in their future, but also just going to the movies and finding comfort in going to the movies. I've been there. I feel that. I go to the movies all the time when I'm going through anything. I think they do bring a lot of comfort, especially going by yourself. Loved that Clara went to the movies by herself. I go to the movies by myself all the time, and I think it's a great experience, I'm not gonna lie. So I thought that was just sweet. I enjoyed those aspects of the characters in those parts of the movie. So overall, I gave this a 3 out of 5 on Letterboxd because I am a sucker for teen romance movies. I will say it. I am. I don't have the book to compare this to, so I know some people are saying things about the book. I just don't have that comparison because I didn't read it. And I enjoyed the performances, minus some of the themes that are explored in this film and some of the dialogue. I still did enjoy. I still had fun watching this. I still had fun. Okay, next up, let's talk about Anniversary, a political drama and thriller. It stars another great ensemble cast with Diane Lane as Ellen, Kyle Chandler as Paul, Madeline Brewer as Anna, Zoe Deutsch as Cynthia, McKenna Grace again as Bertie, Phoebe Dynevor as Liz, Dylan O'Brien as Josh, and Daryl McCormick as Rob. This film is directed by Jan Komasa. So, if you haven't heard what this film is about, here is the synopsis on Letterboxd. What holds them together will tear them apart. When Ellen and Paul's son introduces his new girlfriend one lovely afternoon at their 25th anniversary party, no one suspects that this is the beginning of the end for this happy family. The new girlfriend is Liz, Ellen's former student who left the university some years before, after Ellen called her out in class for her radical ideology. I will say that I really was struck by the trailer for this film when it came out, I believe in August, sometime in this summer. And I am a sucker for, again, horror or thrillers like this. So I was very excited for this film. Something that is so great about this film because it's such a large ensemble cast, you really get to peek at everyone's life in this film and understand the roles they all play in this family, the different perspectives that they come from, all their personalities, because they are all very different individuals. And so I will give them props for that because with an ensemble cast, oftentimes you really explore one or two or three characters, and some of the other characters you don't get to see as much of because it is hard to incorporate so many stories of so many people in one film. But I felt like they really did a great job of incorporating all of these characters, all of their lives, showing how they're all intertwined, how they impact one another's lives, but then what do their lives look like separately? What's going on personally? What's going on in their head? What are they struggling with? And I think they balanced that very well. So I liked exploring that and I really liked how they showed that on screen. Particularly, though, I was drawn to Bertie, who is portrayed by McKenna Grace. She is a lover of science, and she has a very different role in this film compared to everyone else. A lot of these characters in the film are siblings. Madeline Brewer, Zoe Deutsch, McKenna Grace and Dylan O'Brien are all siblings in this film, and of course, McKenna Grace's character, Birdie, has such a large age gap between her other siblings. Throughout the film, you gradually see that she's a bit more outcast by her family. And throughout the events that occur in this film, she's a bit more neglected, and they're neglecting to see the impacts on her life and seeing how this is really impacting her as a teenager. I think that was I'm really glad they explored her character in the way that they did throughout the film too, and I'm glad she didn't just become a more side character that we didn't see a ton of, because I think that her storyline is very important through the whole lace of this film. Like I mentioned earlier, this film does explore politics. It explores how politics divide people, how political ideologies or movements can really quickly impact a number of lives. The trailer starts off with this mirror scene, with Liz talking to herself in the mirror right before she goes into the anniversary party. And I think what I found myself thinking throughout this film is that, am I supposed to think she's a villain? Because the ideologies that she holds are definitely radical. She starts this movement that deeply, deeply changes this family forever, and she causes a lot of discourse and a lot of grief. But as you're watching it, it's interesting to see how she's behaving. How is she treating the other characters as the time passes, as the years pass, as their lives change? How is she interacting with them? Are her beliefs changing? Are they staying the same? And I found myself thinking, like, what does she really want out of this? Did she know what she was doing? Did she really know what she was starting? And what I think is great about a film like this as well is that there's so much possibility for discussion, especially if you watch it with some other people afterwards. It's interesting to see what people thought about the different characters, about the different relationships, about who these characters were. Was there a bad guy? Was there a good guy? What is happening? So I think there's so many possibilities after this film to have great discussions like that. Something else that I think was a very positive thing about this was that the course of events took place over 5 years in this film. Again, like I said, starts off at the 25th wedding anniversary, and you really get to see this way the impact of the political movement that the change has on this whole family's life. Diane Lane and Phoebe Dynevor's characters were really standouts to me through this ensemble cast on top of McKenna Grace's character because they both showcased very strong performances for two very different characters. There's a great line that Liz says to Ellen that is, "I used to be afraid of you. I don't think I am anymore." And the foundations of these characters really change and kind of the grounds that they stand on and confidence levels and all of these things very much change throughout the film. And I think it's very interesting to watch that evolution of who these characters are, what changes in their lives, how do they feel about one another. I think it makes you think a lot. And I appreciated that it made me think a lot because there was so much reflection to do on these characters and where they started from and where they ended. I also found Dylan O'Brien's character to be infuriating, as I believe he is supposed to, and very chilling. Um, you see in this film family almost become strangers, and very quickly, in a very short amount of time. And I think his character specifically shows a lot of change. Last thing I want to mention is that I loved the storyline tie-in to the painting The Lovers by Renee Magritte. I actually had a chance to chat about this painting with the writer Lori Rosine Gambino on our interview that is up now on our channel. You can find that on our Spotify and our YouTube. But she had such lovely comments and insight to share on this, so definitely go give that a listen if that's something of interest to you. Overall, I enjoyed this watch as well. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars on Letterboxd. It had a theatrical release, and I will update you on its digital release. All right, last but not least today, I want to chat about Him, the supernatural horror, the sports horror. It stars Tyreek Withers as Cam, Marlon Wayans as Isaiah, Julia Fox as Elsie, and is directed by Justin Tipping. Now, if you haven't heard about this film yet, here's the synopsis on Letterboxd. Greatness demands sacrifice. After suffering a potentially career-ending brain trauma, Cameron Cade receives a lifeline when his hero, legendary 8-time championship quarterback and cultural megastar Isaiah White, offers to train Cam at Isaiah's isolated compound that he shares with his celebrity influencer wife. But as Cam's training accelerates, Isaiah's charisma begins to curdle into something darker. Now, this film is only 96 minutes in runtime, so it does fit a lot of elements, I would say, within this film. I appreciated throughout the film that it's split into days. Up on the screen, it comes up each day what day it is and has a name for it, which also I think helps audiences understand what's happening between Cam and Isaiah as the film progresses, because there are a lot of elements and themes that are explored. There's a lot of events happening, so I appreciated that they kept the audiences on track that way, just to make clear what was happening. Now, what drew me to this story was the originality behind this film. I'm a big horror movie fan, as I've mentioned. I don't know a ton of sports-focused horror films, so I'm always open to suggestions. If you have more, definitely leave them in the comments because I'd love to check them out. But even past that, it's not this cookie cutter horror film. It's not this regular thriller that we've seen on our screen so many times over the past few years. It really keeps you guessing and trying to understand what's happening in Cam's world as, he takes the next step in his career. There's supernatural elements, psychological elements, all wrapped into this football field setting. The film is really taking Cam's lifelong passion of football and turning it into something that changes his life forever in a completely different way than I think he was anticipating. Now, Tyreek puts on such a great performance in this film. I loved him, and I know he did last summer, earlier this year. And here he is again, trying to escape this terror of the horror movie world. This guy cannot catch a break. But Cam, I felt really like he kept me guessing throughout the film in a way that's it's different from what we're seeing with the demonic and gory elements in this film. I kept thinking, is he aware of what's happening around him? Is he aware on what is really going on that we're kind of starting to see insight on? Is he trying to truly lean into Isaiah's win at all costs mentality that his father also kind of drilled into his head since childhood? Or are his survival instincts truly kicking in his head? Is he seeing signs that we're slowly starting to see as audience members? I felt like he just did such a great job of keeping that mystery and intrigue about his character that I couldn't necessarily pinpoint where he was at, which added to my enjoyment of this. Now, Marlon played a very intense character for sure. Isaiah is very intense, and I think that really matched what his performance was. He did a great job of convincing me that he was a man who has been taught that winning is the only option. That is all he can do, that is all he needs to do, regardless of what that takes. And there's a multitude of levels that he goes to in the film to prove that to be true for his character. But I think he was just it's one of those roles that it's great and sometimes it's funny and sometimes it's very serious and sometimes you're like, "Oh God, what's he gonna do next?" And I think Marlon did a great job of portraying that. I will say though, I think as I was watching personally, I got a bit lost on the supernatural elements, the psychological elements, the gore elements of it all, trying to piece this story together. Now, in the end, I won't spoil anything. I did feel a bit of clarity towards the end because then I could backtrack in my mind and say, okay, that made that, that was that, so on and so forth. But I think the confusion that I had watching it through its entirety just took away a bit of my enjoyment of watching it because maybe this was just a me problem, but I just couldn't piece it together as I was watching it enough. I didn't understand how all of these elements were tying into one whole storyline. Like I said, they fit a lot of elements into this film, and it didn't necessarily feel like too much information overload. I think I was just struggling to put these pieces together as, okay, how are these all connecting? What is going on here? How does this all tie into one major event? I gave it a 2.5 out of 5 on Letterboxd. So if you're interested in checking the film out, it is now available to buy or rent on digital platforms, as well as 4K Ultra HD and Blu-ray beginning November 11th. Well, that is it for me. Those are my 5 reviews of some of the films I've been checking out over the past few months. I want to hear from you guys. Let me know what you've been watching, what have you been enjoying, and what are you looking forward to? We have a little under 2 months left of the year, and there's still some fantastic films on the way that I'm very excited to watch. So let me know what you're looking forward to. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of As Seen on Screen. We'll be back soon with more reviews, news, and conversations, so keep an eye out on our YouTube and Spotify channel for all of those. But until then, I'm Nicole, and you can find us wherever you get your podcasts on Spotify and YouTube. We'll see you next week. Bye!